Okay, hello. For sure, it's not easy to take the word after Dr. Hodgson, and we still wait a moment. Don't be worried, we shall be pretty short in order to recover also some time. Good. That is the today presentation of the scientific seminar, like every year. And I will go first with a short panoramic of what the scientific seminar is doing. And then I will be more than pleased to give the word to Dr. Vicky McWilliams, coming from Australia. The scientific committee is working and is enjoying also all the fantastic stuff that we have in Reus in Mas Barufet. Today, you know, Mas Barufet is hosting more than 14 collaborators, very skilled, very capable. The scientific seminar is, scientific committee is also enjoying a big number of experts and scientists which are helping INC to be present in the right place at the right moment worldwide. Yesterday, after our executive committee and the board of trustees has been decided also to increase the number of scientists and experts up to 20, opening to the big company, opening to agricultural experts, opening to the statistic capable friends that worldwide can provide us big information. So, the quick overview, this continuous monitoring what's happened in our field and in the food area worldwide. And today is becoming really interesting because the number of information and the number of positive facts, they are coming, and Dr. Hodge is a typical example. But we are keeping monitoring and also following what the authority worldwide, and also keeping out when they try to create a non-tariff barrier to the imports, or the export, of course. We are also the official voice of our sector. We are present at the United Nations level, UNEC, FAO. We have continuous contact with WTO and WHO, plus the Food Authority worldwide. Believe me, it is quite interesting, but also time-consuming, but the relation is very important because sometimes from a little part of sand, we are creating a balloon. That is also part of the today easy communication and fake news. Import border rejection, it is also another area very important because that is the thermometer that we are using to feel how the traffic, the trade is moving. Of course, I cannot ignorate in this specific moment in Boca Raton about the countervailing duties. Every one of us is daily or even every 5 minutes informed what is going on, and nothing is like yesterday. So I prepared this long story when we started on April 2nd, on the 2018, that China applied countermeasures against the US imposing of duties. But the key point that today, May 23rd, we have 3 question points. 3 is only because it's a perfect number, but it can be extended as you like. So we never know which is the last Twitter. And the last Twitter is very irritating one part of the Pacific to another part. And we are under this diabolic system which create a lot of instability in the market, unfair competition, and it is exactly the contrary of the nice speech, first from the minister and then Dr. Hodge. We need free access to good food, good nuts, good dried fruit, without wondering every morning if the counter value of the duty imposed it is so high, like 10, 15, 20. We reached in India even 90%, 100%, all foolish things. We need food. Food must be absolutely free because food starts from field. And that is the very important things. And we are taking care what's happened to the field because the farmers are the number one actors in our chain. We were talking this morning also about the notification. We have a very good system to notify and to follow. During the very excellent Holmond presentation, some question was relating to aflatoxin. Well, we are working now, where is the beginning of the aflatoxin? Because a lot has been done in the last 25 years, but now we need to concentrate more and more on the field area, from the field to the harvest, because post-harvest, today, technology is doing fantastic things. Just a few words about the new horizon, the mega trend. Everybody of you would like to know where will be the beautiful statistic the INC is producing, but what is important, what happened in the next 5, 10, 15, 25 years. And the evolution, you know, the producing or grow nuts, it takes time, it takes years. Evolution also in new variety, and that is exactly what the mega trend is trying to study. On this point, we at INC, we need your support, your continual support, your information are precious. Today, we have already prepared a fantastic network moving through 5 continents. At least 12 countries, large producing countries, are for us quite transparent, but there are another 50 where we are investing, and we are creating the network to know from the nursery how many trees they are moving, how many trees go to the field, and when these trees will start. The positive point that we have also to renew old orchard, so practically don't be afraid to plant because the population worldwide is increasing. And in our bylaw, we are considering that 3 billion of consumers, they will be present during 2025. Potential. Now, 3 billion. Take 10%. Is meaning 300 million. So that is the potential. That is a part of what we are doing today, because today we have 1 million people which are regular consumers on nuts. In the meantime, essential is the sustainability of what we are doing. A part of the ethical trading, that is one of our key points, sustainability and integrity in what agriculture may give. Water management, byproducts, renewable energy. Practically, in the nuts, we can use 100% of the products which tree is delivering. Byproducts are not any longer byproducts. They are becoming an essential ingredient because the new technology law has do not consider the small dust of almonds as a byproduct because when it is generated, it is already essential food. The water management, this morning again during the almond presentation, excellent, it was mentioned. Okay, with a new irrigation system, we can save from 25 up to 40%. So the big scandal, the climate change, okay, we are today in that position, and that is again very important to know a little more or to diffuse what INC can support for all of us. You know the particular global approach, and that is the life for our system. Our foundation is based on the global trade approach. We are enjoying, we are not crazy if we are producing in California and consuming in Beijing or Shanghai. We are not crazy if we are moving tons and tons of products through the 5 continents, but that is our power. In the past, some agricultural products was dying because it was not a global trade present and free trade. And now, the pleasure to reintroduce again Dr. Vicky Macmillan, nut allergy, up to date on current evidence and management. Somebody of you will ask, but so far we have spoken with Dr. Hodge. Well, Dr. McWilliam will tell us something very important because we need to be aware that the allergy, it is part of our food difficulties, but we are now knowing the evidence, we can also be more sure what is good, what is not good for somebody. Very limited percentage, but we are also working in this proactive area where the fake news, they go faster on the positive real fact. So Dr. Vicky, I invite you, if you like, to take the podium and wish you a very good time. That is for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to be part of your meeting. It does seem strange that you've invited an allergy dietitian to come and speak to you at this particular conference. I'm like the arch nemesis. I spend most of my clinical time telling my patients how to avoid eating your products, but I spend the other half of my time working in research, and there's a lot of things that have changed around the way that we approach nut allergies, and I hope that paradigm shift is something that you'll take out of my presentation today and see some of the opportunities that you might be able to put into the way that you're doing things moving forward. So I'm going to just start off by doing a quick food allergy 101, just so that we're on the same page and we're talking about food allergies in the same way. And then I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about nut allergies in particular, what we define as a nut from an allergy perspective, because I know botanically and from growing perspectives, the definitions of nuts can be quite different. So I'm just going to outline what we consider to be a nut from an allergy point of view, how common nut allergies are, and it does vary quite a bit around the world, so how common they are and what different nuts are an issue for different parts of the world. Some of the features of nut allergies and the research that's being done in nut allergies too, and how that's going to apply to your particular industries. I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the paradigm shift that we've had in nut allergy management, and I think you'll be pleased to see that we've gone from a particular approach of strict avoidance to now being able to incorporate tolerated nuts into patients' diets, so that's going to be important information for you. And then I'm going to do a little bit of an update on allergy product labelling. There's been a lot of movement and research in the way that we label products around food allergy and nuts, and I'd like to just go through that with you. And then finally, I'm just going to finish off with some of the common questions and myths about food allergy. Really just probably to knock on the head some of the questions that you'll come and ask me about while we're having coffee or having a drink this evening. There's a lot of things that commonly get asked about food allergy, and I'm going to try and cover off some of those myths and questions. So as you're aware from my introduction, I am from Australia, and my son wanted me to say that following Dr. Oz's presentation that I am actually now a doctor from Oz. He wanted me to use that in my introduction. But I come from Melbourne in Victoria, part of Australia. We're known for being terrible coffee snobs in Melbourne. We love our coffee. And Jonathan mentioned in his introduction to being in Florida, we also have the same issue with our weather where we can have 4 seasons in one day, where one moment you can be in brilliant sunshine and the next minute you're dashing to get out of inclement weather that's hit you. The other thing about Melbourne though is we have a beautiful new world-class children's hospital that was built 5 years ago, and that has patient management as well as research and the university campus all in the one facility. So this is where I work and I do my clinical work, but I also do my research and I've done my PhD through this institution. The other thing about Melbourne though is the research that we've done there. It's told us that we are the food allergy capital of the world. We know in Melbourne that we have 1 in 10 infants with a food allergy and about 1 in 20 school-aged children or adults. So for older children in Australia, we have about classroom sizes of about 20 children. So usually 1 child in every classroom is experiencing a food allergy. And when we've looked at data across the world, the prevalence of food allergy really varies across the world. So our study is the Health Nut study at the top. So we've got a prevalence of around 10%, but some countries have very, very low incidence of food allergy. So as low as less than 1%. So particularly Mediterranean countries like Greece and Turkey have very, very low prevalence of food allergy. Asian countries have very low incidence of food allergy. But one of the things that we are finding is that as those countries become more developed, that their prevalence of food allergy is increasing. When we're talking about reactions to foods, we can react to foods in very different ways. And the type of food allergies that we're talking about are just this one type, which gets defined as an IgE-mediated food allergy. And these are the type of food allergies that can cause very severe reactions. All of these other types of ways that we can react to food are not an IgE-mediated food allergy, and nuts are very uncommon triggers of these other types of food allergies. But nuts are a very common trigger of IgE-mediated food allergy. So when we talk about an IgE-mediated food allergy, what do I mean? You actually are reacting to the protein part of the food. So when you're reacting to a nut, it's the protein component of the nut that is driving a food allergic reaction. And it involves our immune system. So it is our immune system that is malfunctioning when we have an allergic reaction to a particular food. So we need the combination of the protein and the immune response for it to be an IgE-mediated reaction. And what happens is those IgE antibodies in the immune system, they bind to our mast cells, and it's those mast cells that release a heap of histamine. And it's the histamine that causes the symptoms. So like when we have hay fever and we take an antihistamine to deal with our symptoms of hay fever, the exact same thing is happening with a food reaction. That histamine moves around the body and it causes different symptoms in different parts of the body. So the symptoms can range from mild to severe and life-threatening. So the symptoms that are milder tend to be things like hives. So this is a very common initial response to eating a particular food protein that will cause a reaction. We see swelling, so children often will puff up very, very rapidly when they eat a particular protein that causes them to have an allergic reaction. Children will also vomit as well. So vomiting quite quickly after eating a food is another sign of an allergic reaction. And sometimes you'll experience one of these symptoms or all of them in combination. The milder symptoms we can actually, sometimes they will self-resolve and the children won't need to have any treatment whatsoever, but they may need to take an antihistamine medication. So if it's just hives or swelling, we can potentially deal with that by just administering an antihistamine medication. The severe reactions are classified as the reactions that affect our airways. So as soon as the airways are involved and we're experiencing breathing difficulties, this is what's considered a serious allergic reaction, and this is what's classified as anaphylaxis. So anaphylaxis has a specific definition, and it needs to be one or more of these milder symptoms happening in conjunction with the breathing symptoms, or it can just be breathing symptoms on its own. And these are the reactions that we worry about, and these are the reactions that patients need to have adrenaline. So patients who know that they have a risk of anaphylaxis need to carry an auto-injector for adrenaline with them at all times. And unfortunately for you guys, the nuts are a common trigger of the severe form of our food reactions. And many patients that have nut allergies will be needing to carry auto-injectors with them at all times. So what foods cause IgE-mediated food reactions? There's actually a wide range of documented foods that can cause IgE-mediated reactions, more than 170. But the common culprits tend to be in children: milk, soy, egg, and wheat. And these allergies tend to disappear in children. So over time, these allergies will be something that they grow out of. And peanuts, tree nuts, shellfish, and fish tend to be the allergies that children can develop, but they can be adult onset allergies as well. So nut allergies, we do see them appearing in childhood, but they can be an allergy that appears for the first time in adulthood. So how do we diagnose IgE-mediated food allergies? It's actually quite complex, and really we rely on a history, because there's not one definitive test that tells us that somebody is allergic to a particular food. So we need to do a good history, and then we combine that with diagnostic testing to come to our outcome. And sometimes when we can't get an answer from a history and the diagnostic testing that we have available, we need to put patients through what we call an oral food challenge. So we bring them in and we give them the food to eat in increasing amounts, and we see whether they develop any of those symptoms that I explained to you. The two tests that we do have available to us, the first one is a skin prick test. So if a patient presents to us describing a reaction to a food that is consistent with an IgE-mediated food reaction, what we tend to do is perform a skin prick test. So for children, the extracts get placed on their back, and for adults, the extracts get placed on their arm. And then we break the surface of the skin with a small lancet device, and the skin blows up like a wheel, like a mosquito bite or an insect bite. And we measure the diameter of that wheel, and how big that wheel gets is what tells us whether the person has a positive reaction or not. The downside of our testing is just because you come up positive on an allergy test doesn't actually mean that you have a food allergy. It tells us that your immune system is sensitized and you have the potential to have an allergic reaction, but it doesn't actually diagnose an allergy on its own. We need the clinical history and we need the allergy testing results in combination. And unfortunately, about 50% of people who have allergy testing done, the tests will come up positive, but if we gave them the food to eat, they would actually be able to eat the food without having a reaction. So just using testing as a way to tell us if someone's allergic to a particular food or not is limited. The second type of test is a blood test, and this is what tends to be used more in America. A lot of the doctors in America will use blood tests to diagnose food allergies. The blood test and the skin prick test measure exactly the same thing, but we prefer skin prick testing in Australia because it's an immediate test. We can do the test and then give our patients the information on the same day at the same appointment. IgE testing is a blood test, and you need to wait for the results to become available, and then you're able to do the rest of your education with your families. But the limitation of both tests is a positive test doesn't equal allergy. And the bigger the test, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're more allergic. So we have no way of really telling a patient who potentially is going to have anaphylaxis to a patient who may only have hives or swelling as their reaction. At this point in time, our only treatment for food allergy is to teach our patients how not to eat the food that they're allergic to. That's the only strategy that we have available to us. So when we look at nut allergies, we know that nut allergies are one of the most common food allergies, and they tend to be lifelong, and they tend to be the most common cause of food reactions and death. So unfortunately, in the allergy world, you are the bad guys when it comes to the foods that can trigger quite significant reactions. And from an allergy perspective, nuts are classified as peanuts and tree nuts. This is what we consider nuts in an allergy perspective. But as you will know, contrary to popular belief, peanuts are actually not a nut, and they're a ground nut and classified as a legume. But from an allergy perspective, they behave very similar to the other tree nuts, so they get classified altogether as nuts. The problem we have when we're talking about tree nuts from an allergy perspective is the definition of a tree nut varies across the world, and this would be the same issue that you experience as an industry. But when we're looking at this from a labelling perspective, what different countries call a tree nut can vary, and there are different names for some of the nuts, as you are well aware, and this can make it difficult when we're teaching patients what particular nuts they need to avoid, and what those particular nuts might be called in a different country can be quite challenging. So in Australia, our definition of a tree nut is the culinary nuts almond, Brazil, cashew, hazelnut, macadamia, pecan, pistachio, and walnut. Our FSAN's definition of nuts doesn't include pine nut as a mandatory allergen. So although peanut and tree nuts are not botanically related, from an allergy perspective, they behave very similar, and they have very similar clinical similarities. So we approach peanut allergy and the tree nut allergies in exactly the same way. So if we're looking at how common nut allergies are, and this is going to be hard to project, so I'm just going to walk you through. At the start of my PhD, we looked at what was the prevalence of tree nut allergies across the world, and the data was very limited. Peanut is the superstar in nut allergy world, and a lot of research gets done about peanut allergy, but we don't have a lot of data around tree nut allergies. So the data was limited to quite a few countries. So we had Asia, Canada, 18 European countries, 8 studies in the UK, only 1 study from Australia, 5 studies from the US, and 1 study from Central America. And you can see where the circle is around the prevalence, that most of the prevalence of tree nut allergies around the world sat at around 2%. The outliers on this other side, over here, these outliers were mainly European studies, and the issue with looking at prevalence of allergies, of nut allergies, is there is a different type of allergy called oral allergy syndrome or pollen food syndrome. And this is a type of allergy that people who are allergic to pollens, particularly birch pollen, and they have hay fever symptoms to their birch pollen, their immune system confuses the proteins that are present in some nuts and fruits as being the same as the birch pollen allergen. And they can develop symptoms of a swollen mouth, itchy tongue, itchy lips. And the prevalence of this type of allergy is actually quite high in Europe, where birch trees are quite common. So the prevalence of nut allergy in European countries tends to get reported to be around 10 to 12%. But a lot of the studies don't differentiate between whether they're talking about the more severe IgE-mediated type of food allergy or whether they're talking about oral allergy syndrome. So when you're looking at studies around hazelnut allergy, which is a very common cross-reactor with birch, the prevalence looks like it's really high. But for most countries, the more severe form of nut allergy, the prevalence tends to sit much, much lower at around 2% or less. And the studies that report higher prevalence, it's very likely that it's due to oral allergy syndrome, which is a different type of allergy, and the symptoms are not as severe. In Australia, as part of my PhD, we looked at what our prevalence rates were of tree nut allergy, and we found that our overall tree nut allergy prevalence was around the same as what had been reported in other parts of the world at around 2%. And we found that cashew allergy was equal to our peanut allergy in Australia. So we eat a lot of cashew in Australia, but cashew was a very significant allergen for us in Australia. What about other parts of the world, which we looked at as part of our systematic review? And again, reports of different types of nut allergies are very difficult to find in the literature. So In America, walnut and cashew tend to be the two nut allergens that are most common. And again, that tends to reflect the consumption patterns that we see in the US, where walnut is eaten much more predominantly there than it is in probably other countries. In the UK, Brazil, almond and walnut, again, that reflects the consumption patterns. I know in Australia we don't eat a lot of Brazil nut, but in the UK, Brazil nut is consumed much more commonly. In Europe, like we talked about, hazelnut is the big problem in Europe, but this tends to be more the oral allergy syndrome type of reaction rather than the more severe IgE-mediated, potentially anaphylactic type of reaction. And then the work that we did in Australia, this is what informed us about our issue that we have with cashew. So for us in Australia, our next priority nut that we really need to be doing research into is cashew nut allergy, because we have a lot of understanding across the world around peanut allergy, but our information that we have regarding other nuts is quite limited at this point in time. We hear a lot about multiple nut allergies, that people have one nut allergy and they're also likely to be allergic to another nut. Again, this is hard to tease out in the literature. So co-allergies to peanut and other nuts is commonly reported. But when you actually look at the literature to see what proportion of patients that are, say, allergic to peanut are actually allergic to other nuts, the data is mainly based on sensitization data. So it's determined off the allergy testing rather than people actually eating the nuts and knowing that they're allergic to them. And as I've said to you, the allergy testing has the limitation of around 50% of the time people would be able to eat the food even though they're positive on a test. So our co-allergy understanding in the nut environment at the moment is a little challenging because a lot of our data is based on just allergy testing results, and we haven't actually been able to do all the food challenge research to see what those actual co-allergy patterns are. So for peanut, we think that around somewhere between as low as 4 to 20% of people who are peanut allergic will actually have another tree nut that they're allergic to. Our understanding with tree nuts is very limited because we just haven't done the research at this point in time. But our strongest co-allergy patterns tend to follow botanical family associations. So most patients that are allergic to walnut or pecan, we take both of those out of their diet as a pair. And the other pair are cashew and pistachio. So most patients who are allergic to cashew will come up positive on a skin prick test or a blood test to pistachio, but they will also, and they're usually taken out of patients' diets together. But again, if we were able to do more research, we could probably find that a lot of patients that were allergic to these combinations would be able to eat the other nuts. So why do we have limited data on tree nut allergy? And I think the problem we have for this is that our previous management of nut allergies was based on blanket banning advice. So if you're allergic to peanut or you're allergic to another nut, our advice was to tell patients to remove all of those nuts out of their diet, regardless of skin prick testing, regardless of what the status was on those nuts. The advice was blanket banning. And we really did that because we thought from previous research that about a third of the patients that would be allergic to one nut would be allergic to another. But that also means that 70% of patients would actually be able to eat another nut. So we've based that advice on the 30%, but there's actually a larger proportion of patients that would potentially be able to eat the other nuts. We also found it very difficult to teach patients to be able to identify between the different nuts. So if you're allergic to a cashew, teaching patients what a cashew looked like different to an almond could actually be quite challenging. So we found it easier just to tell them to leave them all out of their diet. And the other issue was the cross-contamination issues. So in processing, it can be difficult to not have those cross-contact issues with nuts. So that was our previous advice. But our current management of nut allergies is now changing. So for those with a single nut allergy, we really work to include the non-nut, the nuts that they're not allergic to back into their diet. And I'll go through the landmark study that has kind of changed our advice about that. So we no longer advise avoidance as a preventative strategy. So one of the things that we used to tell families when they had a baby was to delay the introduction of peanut until, in some countries, the babies were 5. and to also delay the introduction of other nuts. We thought that was a preventative strategy, that if we delayed the introduction of that baby's immune system and digestive system to the nuts, that we would be protecting them from developing a food allergy. We now know from more research that that information was incorrect, and I'll go through the study that has changed our advice in that area. We've also found through research that the increased diversity of diet and the health benefits of nuts, that people wanted to be able to incorporate those nuts that they were not allergic to back into their diet. And so from a quality of life point of view and a health point of view, we found that it was necessary to be able to change our advice around this. So the game changer in this space was a large study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, so a very prestigious journal. This was a large randomized controlled trial that was funded by the Americans, but conducted in the UK. And what they did with this study was they randomized 640 infants that were at high risk of having peanut allergy. So they already had eczema, and some of them already had egg allergy. So they were babies that were going to be at high risk of developing a peanut allergy. And they randomized them into two arms. So the top arm were babies were given peanut to eat, either as bumba, which as a dietitian is not necessarily the way that I think that we need to incorporate peanut into a baby's diet, or peanut paste. The other arm was babies that were told to strictly avoid peanut. And then they followed those babies up, and at the outcome of the study, the babies that were given peanut only had a 3% allergy rate compared to the babies that were avoiding peanut for that period of time. They had a much, much higher rate of peanut allergy. 17% of those infants ended up having peanut allergy. So the important thing here is they were high-risk infants. So these were infants that we would usually be the most frightened to tell that they should be introducing peanut into their diet early. And these babies, by introducing the peanut into their diet and the babies eating it on a regular basis, it was actually protective for them developing a peanut allergy. This study was a game changer. It made us change our infant feeding guidelines around the world. It made us change our approach to how we educate families about incorporating nuts into their diet when they have food allergies. So what are the implications of this change in nut allergy management? So for food allergy prevention, we now encourage families to introduce peanut and other nut pastes actively into their baby's diet before 12 months of age. This means that we need to have ground or butter or meal forms for younger children, because obviously, apart from being an allergy problem, it's also a choking risk for children when we're trying to give them whole nuts. So this is an area of your industry that would be opening up because of this change in infant feeding guidelines. People want access to nut butters, not just peanut butter, but also nut butters that they can feed to their children that aren't loaded with salt, which aren't loaded with a lot of sugar and additives. So pure nut butters is an area where families are going to be wanting to able to incorporate these products into their babies' diets. For children who have established nut allergy, so they're already allergic to one particular nut, we now encourage the incorporation of other tolerated nuts into their diet. So that blanket banning of nuts in the diet is no longer advice that families are given. We try and establish which particular nuts we can incorporate into the diet, and we encourage them to do that and keep them in their diet on a regular basis. What this does and makes challenging though is families are trying to only eat one particular type of nut when they do have another nut allergy. So they do want to be able to access products where they can be guaranteed that maybe their almonds are not contaminated with peanut or cashew or other types of nut. So this is a challenge for industry that we haven't really had to encounter before. When we had our blanket nut advice, we didn't really worry if you mixed all your nuts up together in your processing, because we were telling families to avoid all nuts. Now we're asking for help to be able to steer our families towards products where they know there may be less chance of contamination with other nuts. The other thing that is challenging is we need specific tree nut labelling. So at the moment in Australia and many other countries, to declare nuts on a label, you only need to say that it contains tree nuts, and you don't need to declare the specific nut. And families now, if they're wanting to be able to incorporate a particular nut into their diet, need to know if it's an almond or a cashew or a pistachio that has been used in that particular product, because they're trying to incorporate specific nuts in their diet. So why all the hype about food allergies? Undeclared allergens are the most common reason for product recalls in Australia and most other countries except for the US, which tends to be foreign body incorporation into products is their most common reason for, is your most common reason for recalls. In Australia, our allergy recalls sit at around 50%. So out of all of the product recalls that we're experiencing in Australia, half of those nearly are due to allergen reasons. And as of putting this presentation together, we'd had 27 recalls in Australia, product recalls in Australia, and 8 of those were due to allergens. So as an industry, we still, as food industry, we still have a huge amount of issues around food allergen management and food allergy labelling. I won't go through, I'll pop that slide up of what's happened in the last, I'll put this slide up to show you what has happened in this last 12 months in other parts of the world. And you can see in New Zealand that milk tends to be an issue. And having said that, I think that's an important point to make, that we have been very worried about nuts from an allergy perspective, but milk is becoming a bigger issue from an allergy perspective, and we are actually seeing a lot of patients not growing out of their milk allergies and being exquisitively sensitive to milk, and we've experienced quite a few fatalities due to undeclared milk in products in Australia and also other parts of the world. So I think you might be getting knocked off your pedestal as maybe the number one risky allergen, that maybe milk might be something that is becoming something that we need to look at. This was just the fatality data that has been published around what foods are actually causing fatalities from an anaphylaxis point of view. Unfortunately, peanut and tree nuts still win the top of the list for causing fatalities due to food allergy, but as I said, I think milk is rapidly catching up. So as I said before, food allergy treatment, the only strategy we have is avoidance. And I just wanted to go through some of the allergy labelling issues that we have. So we have mandatory labelling and we have precautionary allergen labelling as the two ways that we can work out whether there's a nut in a product. The ongoing issues that we have with the mandatory allergen labelling is, as I said, we need specific tree nuts declared on labels. So to move forward and for us to be able to educate patients about which particular nuts they're able to eat, we need to be able to have those tree nuts specified individually on the labels. We still have an issue with the definitions of fish, and we still have issues around some of the non-mandatory allergens like corn and rice. With the precautionary allergen labelling, these are very common in Australia, around 65% of our products. We have a risk assessment tool that is called the Vital Guidelines, which is used in Australia for a lot of our products in other parts around the world. The points that I wanted to make about the Vital Guidelines is this allows us to be able to label, place a precautionary allergen label on a product if we know that it is at low risk of causing an allergic reaction. And the reason we're able to do this is we've now established threshold doses that have been established by scientific experts, where they've taken all our food challenge data and they've pooled that and have been able to come up with threshold levels of an amount that could be in a product that if that level of contamination was present in the product and an allergic person ate it, that only 1 to 5% of them would have an allergic reaction. So we've got to the point now with our research that we can be guided by threshold levels of patients and what amount of food can be in a product before they can have a significant allergic reaction. These thresholds have been tested by one-shot challenges, so we've been able to do studies where we give patients food that has that particular dose in it and allows them to see whether they have allergic reactions to those particular threshold levels. So I'm going to skip through this bit, and I just want to go on to the summary. I'm not going to be able to get to the commonly asked questions. We can cover that over drinks or coffee. I'm just going to go to my last part, which is the summary. Okay. So I've explained to you that nut allergies are common and appear to be increasing. I've explained to you that nut allergies remain our most common cause of anaphylaxis fatalities. But there has been a paradigm shift in nut allergy management, and that total avoidance of nuts now is not our advice to patients, and we're actively trying to find ways that we can incorporate nuts into patients' diets. This still poses some clinical challenges for us as health professionals, and it has created some opportunities now for industry to be able to work with us to be able to allow our patients to be able to do this. There are potential treatments for nut allergy on the horizon. And on that point, I'd like to say thank you for your time and thank you for inviting me to be part of your symposium.
I would like to thank you again, Dr. McWilliam, because, don't go.
I'm running off on him.
No. Unfortunately, we are in a hurry, and I beg you for all the questions that you may have, just to go directly to Dr. Vicky in the next 2 days. She will be with us. I think that her speech has been extremely educative and informative. The key point from just myself has been the clear difference about peanuts, which are groundnuts, and the tree nuts. That is and then the other key point, today we dispose of potential treatment, maybe on the horizon. So practically we are closing this part of our debate with perspective, and we know also where to address. Thank you very much.
Thank you.